The age of reflection is ending, and in its closing, I have a series of questions I'd like to ask you, dear viewer. Did you know that Waves of Darkness has a follow-up R2? This player did not, and as a direct result, lost half of their health, which then put them in prime position to be roll caught. But maybe you already knew about the Waves of Darkness follow-up R2. Another question. Did you know that the initial downward smash of Waves of Darkness will true combo into all 3 waves of the Ash of War and the follow-up R2? This host, whose phantom I had killed earlier and then was resummoned with Power Stance Storm Stomp Pikes, did not know this about this true combo. But hey, maybe you already knew this as well. But did you also know that the downward smash will poise through something as large as a 2-handed Dragon Smasher? This honest Royal Knights Resolve Dragon Smasher host at around rune level 60 Stormveil did not know this. In the same line of questioning, did you know that even just the first wave of Waves of Darkness will true combo into the follow-up R2 if it breaks your poise? This teabagging phantom did not know this, and as a result they got yeeted by the R2, and their host was then graciously returned said teabags. Now, who do you think would win? The Stormhawk Axe L2 or Waves of Darkness on a Great Axe? If you are well versed in standardized test-taking skills or are just good at nodding your head and saying yes, then you might recognize a pattern here and take an educated guess that the correct answer is Waves of Darkness on a Great Axe. New topic. Did you know that invaders have iframes upon spawning in? I mean, of course you did. You're an invader if you're watching this video, most likely. It's just very funny to me that this party did not know about it and then died almost instantly. Okay, but did you know exactly how long those iframes last? The answer is long enough to eat some crab and drink a potion of do more, take less damage, and then rely on Waves of Darkness hyper armor to annihilate the over-aggressive host. Now you might be thinking, oh, this is a Waves of Darkness video, and the answer is no. Waves of Darkness is simply my attention getter. It's the metaphorical promise of free candy from inside the unmarked white van that is this video. No, the real purpose of this video is to evangelize the Crescent Moon Axe, a weapon that currently has my undivided attention and focus. Every time I've booted up Elden Ring in the last 2-3 weeks, I flip through a few of my characters, and then just going back to playing with the Axeman, my beloved Lampwood Warden. But this character was not always the Lampwood Warden. In fact, it was a bit of a journey to get to this point, so allow me to take a break from mansplaining information via the Socratic method and instead tell you a very uninteresting story. Long ago, I created a rune level 60 character for the Dashing Saints era event in which I was leading my own player covenant, those that live within Mist. I dubbed this character the Lichfowl Warden, and the basic concept was that they use Power Stance Grave Scythes with Raptors of the Mist, as well as several jumping attack boosting items to slice and dice their opponents into tiny bits. I made a fairly short video about this build, but I think this was largely overshadowed by the Covenant trailer that just the letter M and I made, which is by far the dumbest but also maybe the best video I've ever made. At a certain point, a patch came through where FromSoft rightly nerfed Power Stance jumping attacks, and so I did that very meta-brained thing where I dropped the build entirely for several months because they slightly nerfed my build. Like, the build still works and functions very well, they just made it slightly less powerful, and I became that Toy Story meme, and I dropped this build in the trash saying, I don't want to play with you anymore. Which is really a great analogy here, because really, all of our characters are just our own little From Software action figures that we give cool little weapons and dress up in their cool little outfits. Some of you are a different breed of weirdos where you try to optimize your poise, and your action figures look stupid because you're obsessed with numbers. And I would say I won't judge you for that, but that's not true. I definitely will. However, like, what does my opinion matter? I'm just some asshole making YouTube videos about dressing up our little virtual action figures, right? But anyways, instead of you and a buddy getting together and bashing each other's action figures into each other in our parents' backyards, we adults get together on our computers and force other people's action figures to interact with our action figures. And then, regardless of the outcome, we feel superior to them in some way, because if we win, it's because we are better at the game than them and more full of skill, and if we lose, it's because they did something cheap, down low, and dirty, like find a weapon that's really powerful and use it. Anyways, I'm getting off track here. So I've had the Lichfowl Warden just sitting there for a while, and I decided to change it up a bit. For a while I've been wanting to use two things very badly, the Meteoric Ore Blade and pretty much any Great Axe. So I said let's do both. This was a mistake. My idea was to have the Meteoric Ore Blade in my main hand for the Katana R1 spam and Superior Running R1s, but mostly for the chopping R2, the Ichi-Manji chop that is unique to the Ore Blade. Then I would offhand a Great Axe for some heavier chops and better poise breaking abilities. The problem with that is that the Ichi-Manji R2s are basically the same movement and speed as a Great Axe R1, so pairing those two weapons is a lot less ideal than you'd think. Or maybe I just thought that way. Also, the Meteoric Ore Blade is just so short, like I'm just too used to the length of the regular Uchigatana after my last video. So every time I would use the Meteoric Ore Blade, I felt like I just had like little T-Rex arms, like I couldn't really reach anything. I was just about ready to throw the build in the trash when I started playing around with two-handing the Crescent Moon Axe, at which point I found that it had an incredible R2, but mediocre running attacks. And then I just tried one-handing the Crescent Moon Axe, and what made the whole weapon click for me was really the one-handed running R2s, which have deceptive range and are an actually decent attack from neutral. It dawned on me that this is the build now. It's a Crescent Moon Axe build, and it's now one of my favorite weapons in the game. And really, this has been my great revelation with build making in Elden Ring. Sure, you can boil down the game to L2 the game, but I feel like if you want to actually have fun and enjoy far more compelling interactions with invasions, center your builds around your weapon's R2 attacks. I'm going to circle back on this concept in a second, but most of you clicked on this video to see the build, so let's talk about that real quick. So I'd say this is a pretty strange stat spread for a build, but the upshot is that it's a strength-leaning quality build at 60 that also has 18 intelligence. 18 intelligence is my go-to base intelligence. It lets you use all of the utility spells like Gravity Well for pulling people off ledges, or Night Maiden's Mist for area denial, but also sillier stuff like Unseen Form. Night Maiden's Mist does the same good amount of damage regardless of staff or upgrade or rune level, so it's fantastic for builds that have generally low intelligence. I got one of my greatest succumbs right after landing this R2 R1 Waves of Darkness combo, and the only reason I was able to achieve this was because I initially sectioned off the host behind the mist so they couldn't interfere with me fighting their phantom, and when they did, they had a moment of great indecision before they succumbed to the mist. I do cast some spells for damage, like Magic Glint Blade, which is a spell that is quite difficult to not get damage out of. It's also the ultimate turret spell, set it up, go to work, and wait for your opponent to forget about it. And you might think that 3 seconds isn't enough for another player to forget about the spell you cast right in their face, but you'd be wrong. They forget about it all the goddamn time. Yes, we're using the Source Heal. We're compensating for the damage debuff by putting the Opaline Hard tier in our Physic as well as the Strength Knot. This is a death-themed character, and I'll expand more on why I'm doing that and what that means later on in this video. But with me saying that, I know there's probably some sort of lore nerd out there who's saying, like, well, actually, Rofo, Waves of Darkness is a gravity Ash of War, which is magic from bugs from space. To which I would say, shut up, nerd. I'm rolling with Waves of Darkness because it looks kind of like those old school DS2 hexes at the very least. So everyone just shut up and just pretend it's a death-related hex Ash of War, and not a bug Ash of War, okay? Also, have I mentioned Waves of Darkness is fun? I have? Well, prepare to listen to me talking about it some more. It's one of those things that just has so many hitboxes that you can find a bunch of true combos or pseudo combos within them. Like, after yoinking this host's phantom off a little board into a bottomless pit, I use that final sneaky wave of Wave of Darkness to true combo into a Great Axe R1. It's also just the ultimate hyper armor move that gets everyone and everything to back off you. Like, no thank you, I do not wish to contest with your claws or your power stance spears. Please be gone from this world. I'm almost on the fence about it, like I think it might be a little too good because it's got so much hyper armor, so much area denial, and really just does so much damage. But I don't know, I'm fine with it for now because it's more of a defensive tool instead of a projectile hitbox that is stupidly large and does a crap load of damage. Gee, I can't really think of those in this game. But the real star of this show is the Crescent Moon Axe, so let's finally talk about that, shall we? The Crescent Moon Axe is a great axe, and is maybe my favorite weapon in this game now. Why? It's all about the R2s. You see, ever since I've started playing these games, I've almost always been pretty disappointed by the Great Axe class, mostly due to the fact that they pretty much only ever did vertical chops as their moveset, and nothing else. Every Great Axe in Dark Souls 3 was essentially just the same vertical chopping animation as the R1, and the R2 would just be a slightly longer windup on the exact same vertical chopping motion. And Elden Ring was at least a little bit better about that, but now the horizontal chop R2s are still pretty damn slow and weighty. Dark Souls 3 had one lovely standout, and the Black Knight Great Axe, which had these graceful diagonal swings that covered a deceptive amount of range. Those Black Knight Great Axe R1s are basically what Elden Ring's Crescent Moon Axe R2s feel like, and it takes what's just an okay weapon and ascends it to a fantastic one. I'm not totally sure about this, but I'm pretty sure the R2 got its speed buffed a couple patches back, so it comes out fast and covers an insane amount of range, all with that good R2 damage that R2s in this game just do, plus it's a great axe. In this invasion, pretty much all I do is press R2, and neither the katanas nor this, I don't know what that Ash of War, I guess it's Barricade Shield, but regardless, it's just no match for a fast, sweeping, heavy damaging R2. Another thing that I just absolutely love about the R2 is that it practically chains into R1s, which, by the way, also got a fairly substantial speed buff too. Because Elden Ring's hit stun priority is a little out of whack, co-oppers everywhere have been trained to just spam R1 out of hit stun, and it works for them. But this ceases to work against the Crescent Moon Axe's chained attacks. So now the heavy hit stun of the R2 allows for a fairly safe follow-up R1 to land if your opponent is just going to spam out of it. That follow-up R1 also has enough hit stun to give you priority for a second R1. What you'll see me do a lot of the time is follow up a successful R2 with an R1 or a successful R1 with another R1, leading to some pretty fantastic pseudo combos. Oh, I know you're about to say something, but shut up, I'm not done talking about this Great Axe R2. The R2 also roll catches extremely well, so even after landing R2s or standing R1s, you'll see me try to roll catch with a standing R2 and then follow that up with R1s a lot as well, leading to something like this combo. That's a lot of attacks from a large weapon in a row, right? Well, that's why I have 26 stamina on a rune level 60 build, my friend. Since they combined equip load into the stamina stat in this game, they made that a very important stat to level these days. And you know I'm gonna squeeze all of the benefits out of that little green bar that I can. So there is one other Great Axe that has this R2, that being Godrick's Axe, which is a pretty decent quality weapon. But the ability to then slap whatever Ashes of War or status effects you want onto the Crescent Moon Axe really pushes it a tier above Godrick's Axe. As you can see, I love Waves of Darkness, but you could also make a lot of different Ashes of War work, any of the Mist Ashes of War, or something like Prelate's Charge or Eruption for trades. I feel like this is also the one Great Axe with a stylish and graceful enough moveset to attach an honest sword dance to. For the longest time, I've seen Great Axes be relegated to nothing but a sword dance stick, and frankly, I'm perturbed and disgusted. I mean, not really, the class of weapons really isn't that interesting outside of 3 weapons in the Great Axe class, but I'm theologically opposed to using weapons solely for their Ashes of War. Now that being said, please go ahead and delete the videos in which I abuse the shit out of Flaming Strike from your mind. Now, you'd think I'd be done saying the word R2 here, right? Wrong. People continue to sleep on the Great Axe's running R2. It's nothing particularly special, but does have very deceptive range on a weapon as long as the Crescent Moon Axe, and it's a great way to attack from neutral. The recovery isn't atrocious, and the range is pretty good, so I'd say that constitutes a pretty good running attack in this here running attack spammin' game. The running R1 is basically the same as it's been in a lot of past games, meaning that it leaves quite a bit to be desired from your usual running vertical chop. However, you'll likely notice that I've been using an offhand Shamshir to get people to panic roll. I've essentially been able to reliably condition players to roll bad and then get roll caught by a running R1, which now that I think about it, takes more work and is slower than just catching them with a well-timed running R2. So with 2 usable running attacks on this heavy, high damaging weapon paired with a phenomenal R2, Honestly, the Crescent Moon Axe starts to kind of feel like a curved greatsword, which I'd say is a pretty damn high compliment in these games. Okay, I'm done with that. We can finally move on past the whole this build is centered on R2's thing. There are a couple other housekeeping things I wanted to cover about this build that I find really fun. You might have noticed that the stats on this build are kind of odd, like a 30-20 stat split at 60 seems just not great, right? Well, as it turns out, the Crescent Moon Axe, when infused with Frost, is actually a dex-leaning quality weapon. That doesn't actually matter that much in the end, because the difference between a 25-25 strength dex split, which is what I'd be able to afford if I just tweaked a couple of the talismans, and a 30-20 split at plus 12 is 1 point of damage difference on that Great Axe. Same goes for adding 10 strength or dex via the not tiers. It all comes out pretty much the same damage either way. So I opted for more strength because it has a few more things going for it at this rune level that I like. For one, I can now properly use the Jar Cannon, which, well, we all know what the Jar Cannon does. But what I will add to the Jar Cannon discourse is that it allows me to actually play out unwinnable invasions by just annoying the absolute shit out of whoever has decided to play the game in the worst way possible. For example, these two bozos are ganking with the Taunter's Tongue on standing around in the middle of an open field and sniping whoever is even mildly distracted with Bolt of Grandsacks. And there's no way I'm just gonna engage with that at all. I'm not about to try to play let's dodge the hit scan sniper rifle that they put in Elden Ring. Let's dodge two of them at the same time, actually. So what I do instead is I drag them all the way to the Shaded Castle and wait for a competent co-invader to show up, who finally does. It is only then I find out that it is in fact I who am not the most competent co-invader. In my defense, my co-invader's piercing thing did a lot of damage. After I died though, I messaged my co-invader who confirmed that he did indeed finish off that dumbass duo, and he also agreed that his piercing thing does maybe a little too much damage. So there are a few other tools I like to use as well. 30-20 is a pretty specific stat spread because it's the exact requirements for the Winged Greathorn, a great axe that I have never seen anyone use in this game, not even once. And it's also not very good, the damage is insanely mediocre. However, it does have a unique Ash of War called Soul Stifler that I had to look up to find out what it does. It essentially creates this cloud of souls for about 10 seconds that inflicts a damage debuff on all of your opponents that are standing in this cloud full of souls, and it gives them this debuff that makes them take about 15% more damage for 60 seconds. It also stacks with Frostbite, pushing your opponent into a range where they are suddenly taking around 40% more damage. Is it very useful or effective? No, not really. Your opponent really has to just stand there and stare at you while you summon a cloud of annoyed souls. But it is extra goofy to whip out a weapon nobody has ever seen before and beat them to death with it. Speaking of weapons nobody has ever seen, I've actually been using the Chain Link Flail as of late, and it's just the funniest weapon I could possibly use. To be clear, this is not a flails are underrated moment or video or whatever. Flails are still quite bad and have very few redeeming qualities. But they do have a halfway decent couple of running attacks and an R1 chain that is fairly quick, and that's about it. You might be rightfully wondering why I'm using these weapons at all if I just ran them into the ground. But I'm using them for the other use of flails, that being for BDSM purposes. You see, whenever I invade a Bonfire Duelist, I've taken to switching to a frost-infused chain-link flail with barbaric roar on it. That way, the fight immediately goes from, what they want, which is some stupid pitting of optimized PvP builds against each other, with one side having all of the advantages they could ask for, to an utterly meaningless fight, as it should be. If I lose to one of these dumbass Bonfire Duelists, then congrats, you beat a flail user. But if they lose, oh boy, if they lose, you just lost to a flail, you complete loser, you absolute buffoon, you'll never recover from this humiliation, and no amount of stream sniping Pigcognito will ever recover your dignity, you disgusting little worm person. This does seem like a lot of hatred directed towards people who are looking for duels, but I've just had enough. I encounter more Bonfire Duelists at something like Boilprawn and Shack, or just sitting in the middle of the lake of Lernia at 60 and 80, where the PvE is not even kind of a threat. and all they're looking for is like a 1v1 duel. And I've had enough. I've lost it. I've snapped. I'd rather fight like more dedicated gankers than another Bonfire Duelist who gives me like this stupid bow. I'm just over it. I don't know what it is about this game. Like, I could stomach it in Dark Souls 3 because you invaded a lot of solo hosts. Like, that's just part of the game. But in this game, like, you lured me here with the Taunter's Tongue. You asked me to be here, and what do you have to show for it? Like, an uncreative build that you just, like, looked up on YouTube and were like, power stance lances are supposed to be pretty good. Or the far more common one, which is just, like, some bad katana build that they've named Musashi. Because, you know, they read a Reddit post about, like, some swordsman that may or may not be true at all. And they're like, yeah, he's the greatest swordsman of all time. I'm going to wield a katana. Shut the fuck up, nerd. I hate you. Okay, I'm calming down. But I have one more section of this video, so bear with me here. Let's talk about a little bit of lore. Lore-wise, I was just going to go back to calling this character the Lichfowl Warden, but instead I'm going with this character being named the Lampwood Warden, to better fit this theme of them carrying around a giant axe everywhere. My idea is that they guard and prune the Lampwood and guide those that they invade to the afterlife. What's that? You don't know what the Lampwood is? What are you, some sort of lore ignoramus? Some sort of casual Elden Ring gamer who's too busy to pore through every item description in the game, recalling obscure terms like Lampwood, which, by the way, shows up exactly once as a synonym for the Helfin in Helfin Steeple, and the Helfin is a corresponding tree of guidance to the Erd tree that guides the dead in the afterlife. But why wouldn't you know that? Are you just some sort of cat? Okay, I'll stop. So that's why the fashion includes the bird helm. I wanted to basically evoke this deathbird worshipping knight that tends to the Lampwood, as the deathbirds and the twin bird are supposed to be these envoys of an entirely unmentioned outer god, and outer god I presume has something to do with death. This is a roundabout way of explaining why at one point I was wearing the Raging Wolf chest armor, but then at another point I needed something a little bit more burned and dilapidated, which the fingerprint armor fits quite a lot better. The thought was that since the armor set is partially melted, and you could make the case that for this character, they are melted by Ghost Flame instead of the embrace of the three fingers. I think this afterlife and deathrite focused aspect of this character is intriguing because I believe it's going to be the core focus of the DLC, which is a hilarious and stupid thing for me to say after just recently mocking people for making predictions about future From Software projects. And of course I have to remind everyone of how many content creators out there were convinced that the Dark Souls 3 DLC would take place in Londor, and it really did not. So this seems like a bit of a fool's errand trying to predict the DLC, because you know it's probably going to be something with time travel, etc, etc. That's like the one constant that they like to do for their expansions and DLCs or whatever. That all being said, I will explain my thoughts on this Afterlife DLC prediction that I'm making here. First off, it's called Shadow of the Erd Tree, and that could mean a billion things, including just a nifty little reference to Shadow of the Colossus, a game we know that Miyazaki likes a lot. But I'm of the opinion that the Shadow of the Erd Tree is referring to the Helfin, a guiding tree of dead in the afterlife, essentially a shadow to the guiding tree in the land of the living. And since one of the main themes of any FromSoft game is inertia and disparity, I think a huge focus on death in the DLC makes sense considering how Marika removed death entirely from the Elden Ring, throwing off its balance. And because you know FromSoft really likes to reference, karma, I assume there's going to be some sort of like karmic justice or like overcorrection towards death. And it would also make sense that when Marika removes the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, the natural afterlife of the Lands Between also gets incredibly screwed up. Another thing is that we see Miquella riding Torrent depicted in the one piece of concept art that we have of this expansion so far. But y'all, in our current timeline, Miquella is big time dead. Like, nobody has ever been deader. Okay, well, there are definitely dudes who have been more dead than Miquella currently is. And I know Gideon has a line about Miquella continuing his slumber, but my friend, this does not look like the arm of someone who is doing too hot at the moment. I think this time travel possibility is very real, but I wouldn't be surprised if Miquella was present in the afterlife, because he is some kind of dead, either in body or soul. possibly in the same ways that Godwyn and Ranni are dead in soul and body, respectively. And my last piece of evidence towards this prediction that I'm making is that the place that Miquella and Torrent are traversing in the concept art does not match up with any of what we know the lands between to look like. The combination of ghostly shadows of gravestones spread out across a field of reeds, which, by the way, is one of the Egyptian afterlives, really says to me that this is not the land of the living. As for what's happening with the Erd Tree getting strangled, yeah, I got nothing solid here. My only guess is it's something to do with death overcorrecting after having been gone from the lands between for so long. I know a lot of people have been predicting that it is some sort of those that live within death dead Godwyn tree strangling the Erd Tree, but I don't know. I just don't think Godwyn is that important to the entire scope of the game. Marika removing death is important to the entire scope of the game. Death is such a present and structural issue in the lands between that Godwyn and those that live within death are only just one facet of everything that's happening with death because the rune of death has been removed. But with that being my prediction for the DLC, I thought I might as well spread the term Lampwood around the lands between so that people might know it better. Will hosts look past my evil red hue and see that my name is trying to make a point with the lore? Of course not, but maybe they can ponder what the hell a Lampwood is in their loading screen after I send them to their own afterlives with waves of darkness. So this is the direction I'm taking everything from now on though. I said at the beginning of the video that the Age of Reflection was ending, not really because I have no more reflections, but because I feel like I know what direction I need to move towards between now and the advent of the DLC. Through the Age of Reflection, I've drawn the conclusions that I needed to make. That a fun Elden Ring build for me always includes spells but doesn't over-rely on them, and that while many say that this is L2 the game, the primordial and intended truth of pressing buttons in Elden Ring has always been that this is in fact R2 the game, and the patches support this theory. Now it is time to enter an age of prophecy. The prophecy that this DLC will indeed bring about new horrors and crimes against the very fabric of morality in the online portion of From Software games, but that the DLC will absolutely be steeped in death and the afterlife in the lands between. Therefore, from now until the advent of the DLC, I will be making purely death-related characters. Death in all of its many forms in Elden Ring. Because in the current state of the lands between, death has been banished, and it is our job as both tarnished and invaders to bring about its return.